The wind off Storm's End was sharp that morning, crisp with sea salt and the cold of coming change. Renly Baratheon stood on the battlements, his green cloak fluttering, golden antlers stitched across the back. He wasn't smiling. That was the first thing Sir Loras noticed when he approached. Renly always smiled, mocking, confident, playful, but today his jaw was locked and his eyes were on the eastern horizon. "I've sent word to Stannis," Renly said quietly. Still not. Looking at him, Loras blinked. "You've what?" "I've sent word," Renly repeated, turning now. "A rider under my seal. He'll reach Stannis by nightfall. I've told him. I'll meet." Loras stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. "You were ready to march. You had the Reach behind you. The Tyrells, hundreds of banners. You would have been king, Renly. King." Renly's voice was quiet but resolute. "And I would have split the realm in half. Maybe worse. He's my brother, Loras. He may be cold, hard and joyless, but he's got a claim. And more than that, he's got fire. Real fire. Have you heard what happened at Dragonstone? The Red Priestess, the burning statues? Men say he's chosen by some god." Loras scoffed. "You believe in gods now?" "I believe in keeping this country from burning to ash," Renly said. "Ned Stark's gone. Robb's crowned himself. Joffrey sits on the Iron Throne and no one knows what that creature will do next. If I march against Stannis, the Baratheon name is divided forever. I'm not doing it. I'm not starting a war with my own blood." Loras was silent, his jaw clenched. Renly put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't think I've abandoned ambition. If I can't wear the crown, I'll shape the hand that does." And so, under the copper skies of a fading day, Renly rode to meet his brother. The meeting took place in a rocky glen halfway between their camps. Stannis was already waiting, standing beside Melisandre, her red robes a slash of colour against the dull earth. Sir Davos hovered behind them, brow furrowed, his eyes fixed warily on Renly. Stannis didn't smile. Of course he didn't. His mouth was a hard line, his eyes narrower still. "You've come to bend the knee?" he asked. No greeting, no warmth. "I've come to end a war before it starts," Renly replied, sliding off his horse. "I've come to offer you my banners, my men, my support." Melisandre tilted her head, watching him. "Why now, Lord Renly?" "Because I've seen enough blood in this family already," Renly said. "And because Joffrey is the enemy, not each other. I won't be the fool who weakens our house while the Lannisters tighten their grip." Stannis studied him for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he turned to Davos. "Would you believe it, Onion Knight? My brother's grown a conscience." Davos gave a cautious nod. "We could use his men. The Reach alone could break the Lannisters' hold." "And what do you want in return?" Stannis asked, turning back to Renly. "A seat at your table," Renly answered smoothly. "Not as king, not as heir, but as brother. I'll help you win this war, and in return I want peace. For me, for my men, for the realm." There was a long pause. Melisandre opened her mouth to speak, but Stannis raised a hand, stopping her. "Very well," he said, "but betray me, and I'll burn you myself." And that was it. The alliance was sealed with a simple nod, but in that moment the wheel of fate shifted. Because with Renly behind him, Stannis would march north, with not just the cold fire of his own men, but the golden force of the Reach at his back. And the Lannisters had no idea what storm was about to break upon them. The ravens flew fast from Storm's End, and the realm felt the tremor before it saw the quake. Word spread like wildfire. Renly had bent the knee. The bannermen who had once cheered his name with cups raised high in Highgarden's halls now faced a new reality. Some rejoiced, pleased that the brothers Baratheon stood united. But others whispered, especially in the Reach, whispers of betrayal, of cowardice, of ambition abandoned. Mace Tyrell was the first to take offence. He made a pact with that madman. The Lord of Highgarden roared in his solar, a goblet of arbor gold spilling over the polished table. He dares throw my daughter's betrothal away like some wine-soaked jest. Larry Tyrell, ever composed, only raised a brow. Perhaps you should worry less about your daughter's prospects and more about the fate of your house. Stannis commands fire and steel now, with Renly's knights at his side. Mace grumbled, but he heard her. Elsewhere, in the chill halls of Dragonstone, Stannis stood over the painted table with his fingers pressed to the reach. Melisandre stood close, unnervingly quiet, her red eyes flicking across the room. Davos watched both warily. The presence of Renly's forces had changed everything. King's Landing is vulnerable, Renly said, eyes scanning the map. Their strength is in chaos. Tywin is far in the west. Joffrey is a boy playing king, and the city remembers our name. Stannis, ever rigid, nodded. And if we strike fast, we take it before the lions know we've moved. Melisandre stirred. And burn the false idols in the sept, and crown you in the name of R'hllor. Renly raised an eyebrow. Let's focus on the throne first, shall we? You can set fire to whatever you want after we have it. Stannis gave him a long look, but surprisingly said nothing. The army marched within the week. From Storm's End, from Dragonstone, and from Highgarden, they moved like a storm cloud, swallowing villages, rivers, roads. The combined force of the Baratheon and Reach armies had not been seen in a generation. Even the gold cloaks began to stir, unsure whether their loyalty lay with the boy king or the rightful one now approaching with fire and fury. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister was livid. "What do you mean Renly joined him?" she snapped, her voice shrill with disbelief. That fool had half the realm behind him. Varys offered a sly smile. "And now Stannis has more than fire priests and wooden ships, your grace. He has knights, gold, grain. The Reach does not march lightly." Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, legs swinging, face twisted in a child's scowl. "Let them come. I'll have their heads." Cersei silenced him with a glance. She turned to Tyrion, who leaned casually on a pillar, sipping from a goblet. "You said you had this under control," she hissed. "I did," Tyrion said, unfazed. "But I didn't expect Renly to swallow his pride and play the dutiful brother. It complicates things." She was breathing hard, like a caged animal. "We need father," she said finally. "Send the Raven. We need him back from the west, now." But it was already too late. Stannis and Renly arrived at the gates of King's Landing by nightfall on the third day of the siege. Fires burned across the riverfront. Ships bobbed like toys in Blackwater Bay. Siege towers rose like wooden gods, and drums pounded from the camps, echoing through the darkness. On the walls, the gold cloaks watched, some with awe, some with dread. And in the command tent, Renly sat beside his brother, pulling off his gauntlets, smiling for the first time in weeks. "You know," he said, "I think I rather like war when it's this easy." Stannis didn't return the smile. "It's never easy, not when the city bleeds." Renly tilted his head. "Then let it bleed if it must. But when the sun rises, the lions will fall." Outside, the Red Keep braced for war, but inside the Baratheon camp, something darker stirred, because not all alliances were forged in loyalty. Some were born in fire, and fire always demands a price. The morning of the assault came heavy with smoke and silence. Across the Blackwater, the city stood still like a lion crouched behind stone walls. The Red Keep loomed over the sprawl of King's Landing, high and proud, but beneath its golden domes, fear was blooming like rot. Inside the streets, whispers travelled faster than wildfire. "Stannis has come. Renly too. The Baratheons have returned." Inside the royal chambers, Cersei had already ordered Tommen hidden away in Maegor's holdfast. Joffrey, dressed in armour, too large for his frame, strutted like a peacock on the battlements, waving to the soldiers and barking commands that meant nothing. He was a boy in a man's war, but Tyrion was not. In the Tower of the Hand, he stared over the bay. His fingers tapped the map as he counted the odds: ships, fire, gold, steel, and the crushing weight of inevitability. He had wildfire stockpiled beneath the city, thanks to Halin and his alchemists. But the scale of this new alliance, it was madness. Renly brought the reach, he muttered to Bronn. We expected siege, not a flood. Bronn scratched at his scruffy jaw. So light it all up, burn them before they set foot on the shore. Tyrion shook his head. If we torch the bay, we risk turning the city into a funeral pyre. I need precision, not chaos. Outside the city, the Baratheon camps stirred with purpose. Siege towers rolled into place, battering rams readied at the main gate. Stannis, in his black and red armor, stood like a statue carved from war itself. No passion, no hesitation, only purpose. Renly rode beside him, clad in his brighter greens, and gold, smiling faintly, but his eyes were alert. He watched the city with the sharpness of a man who once dreamed of ruling it, and now chose to conquer it instead. Stannis raised his hand, the signal was given, and the assault began. The drums thundered, thousands surged forward, arrows rained from the walls, siege towers rolled, groaning on wooden wheels. The ground trembled with the might of men and steel. Renly's knights from the Reach, proud and glorious in polished armor, led the charge at the main gate. The battering ram, shaped like a roaring stag, slammed against the heavy oak with the rhythm of a death knell. Inside, Tyrion gritted his teeth. Now, he said to Bronn. And with a snap of the fingers, the wildfire was unleashed. Green flame erupted from the bay, engulfing enemy ships and setting the waters ablaze. Men screamed, masts cracked, sailors jumped into fire, not water. The sky turned an eerie green as the heat boiled from below. Stannis, on horseback, didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed at the sight, planned no doubt by the dwarf. "Clever little monster," he murmured. But Renly wasn't as calm. His men were burning, hundreds of them. Some ships with Reach banners were caught in the trap. His face twisted in fury. "He burned our men!" Renly shouted. "They died for victory," Stannis said coldly. Renly turned on him. "They died because your damn priest whispered about shadows and fire. If I hadn't backed you—" "But you did," Stannis snapped. "You swore your banners to me. You want the throne, I'll win it. Your knights are the cost." For a second, Renly said nothing. Then he looked back toward the city walls, his jaw tight. They had the numbers. They still had the strength. Even with the fire, the Baratheon army was pressing in from three sides. And now, a crack. The main gate buckled under the ram. King's Landing was breached. Stannis surged forward with his guard, and Renly followed, sword drawn, teeth clenched. Inside the walls, gold cloaks began to falter. Some dropped their swords. Others fled. The people screamed from windows and doorways as the sounds of war entered the streets. And in the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister poured herself a goblet of wine and whispered to the Maester, "Bring me the nightshade, if it comes to that." Joffrey had vanished. Coward to the bone, he had slipped away with the Hound, abandoning his own men to fate. In the chaos, Tyrion took to the streets, leading the defense himself, his axe stained with blood, his voice hoarse from shouting. He saw the breach, he saw the enemy pouring in, and then he saw Renly. They locked eyes for a split second. Tyrion's face twisted in shock. "You should be dead," he muttered. But Renly only grinned and charged forward. Tyrion barely had time to duck. Renly's blade missed his skull by inches, slicing the air where the imp's head had just been. Bronn dragged him back behind a cart, already hurling daggers with uncanny aim at charging Reach knights. "Renly fucking Baratheon," Bronn spat. "Didn't he used to be dead?" Tyrion wiped the blood from his brow, voice rasping. Apparently not dead, just very well advised. Above them, the walls of King's Landing screamed with fire. And steel! The Baratheon banners had entered the gates, and gold cloaks were surrendering in droves. The battle was lost. Tyrion knew it, and in his gut something colder bloomed, not fear but dread. What happens after Stannis wins? Renly's face had been different, less charming, less smug. There was something harder in him now, the kind of hardness that comes from betrayal or ambition reborn. Cersei, meanwhile, stood alone in the throne room. The Iron Throne loomed tall behind her. Ser Lancel had fallen in the yard. Pycelle was nowhere to be found. Only Sir Meryn Trant remained, bloodied and pale, guarding the doors with eyes wide in panic. "The Queen must flee," he pleaded. "We'll get you to the harbour." Cersei turned to him slowly, her voice like venom. "The Queen does not run." She could hear the clamour approaching, the battle crashing against the steps of the Red Keep. The Iron Throne's sharp spines gleamed in the torchlight. She stared at it for a long while. She had ruled from the shadows, pulled strings, killed for her children, lied for her family. And now, in a single day, the throne was about to fall to a bitter man with a flaming sword and a younger brother who once loved roses more than crowns. She sat on the throne, not properly, not as queen. She slumped on it, her fine gown torn, goblet in hand, her eyes glazed over. She laughed softly to herself. "If they want it so badly," she whispered, "they'll have to rip it from my hands." Outside, the Red Keep's gates were breached. Baratheon. Soldiers poured in. Ser Davos led the charge up the main stairwell, shouting for surrender. Behind him came Renly, his green cloak now torn and ash-stained, but his eyes alight with purpose. He found Stannis already ahead, striding into the throne room. And there she was, Cersei Lannister on the Iron Throne, drunk, defiant, unbroken. "Come to steal what's left of Robert's legacy," she slurred, lifting her goblet. "You always were such a dull man, Stannis. Cold, miserable. No wonder he never loved you." Stannis said nothing. He stepped forward, sword drawn. Renly followed, slower, his eyes flicking across the room. No sign of Joffrey, no guards, just her. "Where is the boy?" Renly asked quietly. Cersei smiled cruelly. "Gone, like all your dreams." Stannis raised his sword, but Renly placed a hand on his brother's arm. "Wait." He stepped closer. "She's more valuable alive." Stannis turned to him sharply. "She is poison." "She's leverage," Renly countered. "If the boy still lives, we'll need her to draw him out." Stannis hesitated. The Red Woman behind him stepped into the room. "She should burn," Melisandre whispered. "She bore the abomination. She fed lies to the realm. Let her die in flame." But Renly's voice cut through. "No." It wasn't a request. For the first time, Stannis looked at his brother not with disdain, but something nearing caution. Renly stared at Cersei like a man who saw beyond her venom, who understood the games she played because he played them too. "She lives," Renly said, "for now." The moment passed like a blade between them, and then the bells rang out across King's Landing, not for death, but for surrender. The city was taken. The Iron Throne no longer belonged to a boy king or his drunken mother. It belonged to the Baratheons once more. But even as Stannis approached the throne, blood still dripping from his blade, Renly stood just a few steps behind, watching, waiting, his green eyes cold with thought, and in that instant you could almost mistake him for the king. The Iron Throne stood silent, cold, and indifferent to its new master. Stannis Baratheon sat rigid upon it, his face carved from stone, his knuckles white on the hilt of his sword. The room was eerily quiet. The blood was still drying on the stones. The smoke from the wildfire clung to the walls like a ghost, and Yet despite the victory, there was no cheer, no song, no roaring crowd, only Stannis, only silence. Renly stood at the foot of the throne steps, watching, observing. The weight of the moment pressed on him like a vice. He had helped win this war. It was his men who had breached the gates, his knights who had bled in the streets, and yet here he was, still in second place. Stannis finally looked down at him. "You expected a crown?" he asked. Renly didn't flinch. "I expected respect." Stannis rose slowly, the sword clinking as it tapped against the throne's sharp edges. "You'll have your seat on my council," he said flatly. "Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, Lord of Highgarden if the Tyrells won't bend." Renly smiled without warmth. "And you think that's enough?" "It is what you've earned," Stannis replied. "Nothing more." Melisandre stood by the side, eyes glowing with that eerie calm, her red robes flowing like smoke. "The Lord of Light showed this moment in flame," she murmured. "The throne claimed by the rightful king, the usurpers scattered." Renly looked at her sharply. "What did your flames say about who sits on that throne next?" She smiled, but did not answer. Later that night, as the city buried its dead and the Reach Knights lit their fires along the Blackwater shore, Renly stood atop the ramparts of the Red Keep, staring down at the streets of King's Landing. Loras joined him, silent for a long time before speaking. "You gave him the city. He gave you a title." "I gave him a kingdom," Renly muttered. "You should have taken it," Loras said bitterly. "You had the army. You had the love of the people. He has fire and fear." Renly turned, eyes colder now. "He also has faith, and men will die for that, Loras. That's a kind of power I never understood, until now." Loras stepped closer. "You're not going to just
serve him, are you?"
Renly looked out across the darkness. "No," he whispered. "I'm going to outlive him." Far away in the Westerlands, Tywin Lannister sat grim-faced in his war tent, reading the Raven Scroll with blood on his knuckles and steel in his stare. His son, his grandson, his name, all thrown from power. The Red Keep had fallen. Cersei had been taken alive. Joffrey's whereabouts still unknown. Kevan waited in silence as Tywin crumpled the letter. "The realm will turn against them," Tywin growled. "Stannis has no charm, no politics, no subtlety, and Renly is too clever to stay loyal." "Should we march east?" Kevan asked. Tywin looked out over the campfires. "No," he said after a long pause. "Let them rule, let them taste it. The longer they hold power, the more enemies they make, and we will be there, waiting." In King's Landing, the War Council gathered. Stannis stood at the head, with Renly seated at his right hand. Davos, Melisandre, and a few surviving lords formed a broken circle of power. The mood was tense, the room cold. "The boy king escaped," Davos reported. "Rumors say he fled north, disguised. The Hound was seen riding with him." "He'll die on the road," Stannis muttered, "or in some brothel like his father." Melisandre smiled faintly. "Or perhaps he will return, reborn in flame. All kings must burn before their ashes crown the world anew." Renly frowned. "Does everything with you have to end in fire?" "Everything does," she answered calmly. Stannis leaned forward. "We hold the throne, but not the realm. The north is lost to Robb Stark, the west to Tywin. The Riverlands are in chaos. We will bring them to heel, but not by sword alone." He turned to Renly. "You will travel to Highgarden. Speak to Lady Olenna. Make her bend." Renly didn't rise immediately. "And if she won't?" he asked. Stannis' stare was hard. "Then remind her what happens to those who don't." Renly stood, bowing slightly. "As you command, Your Grace." But inside something coiled, something dark. He had bent once. He would not bend again. Weeks passed. Kings, Landing no longer screamed. The corpses had been cleared from the streets, and the smell of fire gave way to the scent of piss and flowers, cheap perfume over blood. Stannis Baratheon ruled from the Iron Throne, grim and tireless, his face as warm as a slab of cold iron. But the throne, while won, felt brittle in his grasp. The realm did not flock to him. The lords of Westeros were cautious, watchful. Ravens flew in every direction, but only silence returned from the Eyrie, the Twins, and the Dreadfort. Robb Stark still ruled from the north, crowned by his bannermen and bolstered by recent victories. Tywin Lannister had not moved. He was a man who knew patience could wound deeper than swords, and in the Reach, Olenna Tyrell sat like a spider in her garden. Renly rode to Highgarden under a banner of peace, but the smiles that greeted him were tight, and the gates closed a moment too slow behind him. He hadn't seen Loras since their bitter farewell, and the warmth that once existed between them had gone cold, calcified by war and choices made. Olenna met him in the rosewood solar, alone, a simple shawl over her shoulders, and a cup of tea in her wrinkled hands. "So," she said without rising, "the lesser Baratheon returns. Shall I curtsy, or do you prefer kneeling?" Renly smirked, but his eyes didn't smile. "I prefer honesty, my lady. I come bearing no crown, but a kingdom still in the making." "Your brother sent you to collect fealty," Olenna said, not asking. "He's clever in his own dull way. Send the golden boy to charm the roses." He sat across from her, leaning forward. "I didn't come to charm. I came to offer power." She raised a brow. "You'd be the first man in history to offer power to House Tyrell without trying to marry into it." Renly chuckled. "That offer still stands. Your granddaughter would make a queen fit for legend." "Margaery wants to rule," Olenna said plainly, "not decorate your brother's arm. And I do wonder, dear, when will you stop pretending your loyalty isn't a leash?" The words cut sharper than steel. Renly set down his cup, the charm fading from his face. "Stannis is hard, rigid, unforgiving. He burns those who don't obey. But me, I listen. I understand how to bend without breaking. You want power, Olenna? Ally with me, not the throne." Her eyes sharpened. "You speak as if you're already free of him." "Not yet," he admitted, "but soon. The city bows to his rule, but it breathes with my blood. The Reach follows me, not him. If you bring your full banners to the capital, we can remake this kingdom." "Remake it or steal it?" He didn't blink. "What's the difference, if the realm is better for it?" A long silence. Olenna sipped her tea, eyes locked on his. Then, slowly, she smiled, thin and knowing. "I always liked you more than your brother," she said at last, "even if you are the more dangerous one." Back in King's Landing, Stannis sat in council with Davos and Melisandre. The city still murmured behind their backs, still called him the Shadow King in taverns and alleys. The wildfire scars had not faded, nor had the whispers. "Renly's taken too long," Stannis muttered. "He should have bent the Tyrells by now." Davos shifted uneasily. "He may be playing a longer game. Olenna is no fool." "He was a boy playing at court," Melisandre said, eyes flickering. "Now he is a man playing at kingship." Stannis eyed her. "What do your flames show?" She closed her eyes. "I see a stag, with two heads, one crowned in light, one bathed in shadow. They war beneath the same sky. But only one survives the storm." Stannis frowned. "Which one lives?" Her smile returned, quiet and eerie. "That remains to be seen." By the time Renly returned to the capital, he brought more than words. He brought wagons of grain, Tyrell gold, and 3,000 fresh knights. The city greeted him with cheers. The small folk loved him. He smiled, kissed babies, blessed marriages. He was the king they wished sat on the throne. and Stannis saw it. From the walls of Maegor's Holdfast, he watched the crowds chant his brother's name, not his, never his. "Let them cheer," he said to Davos. "Crowds are afire, bright, noisy, and easy to snuff out." But his hand clenched the stone ledge tight, and Renly was already thinking beyond cheers, beyond titles. He wasn't just back in the capital, he was ready to take it. The days that followed Renly's return to King's Landing were rich with silk and poison. He walked the streets like a prince reborn, shaking hands with butchers and bakers, hosting feasts for minor lords, holding court in taverns and brothels alike. Gold flowed, wine poured. The city smiled again, not for Stannis, not for fire and sermons, but for Renly, the man who laughed and listened, who promised light after the war's endless shadow. And Stannis noticed. In the great hall, his council grew quieter. Reports came in, soft-footed but sharp. Renly's name was whispered more than yours, his face more welcome, his word more trusted. At first, Stannis held his tongue. He was not a man of emotion. He believed in order, discipline, loyalty. But discipline meant nothing when the realm began slipping through his fingers. One night, he called Davos to his chamber. No guards, no red woman. The room was cold. "I don't trust him," Stannis said, pacing near the window. "He plays the dutiful brother, but I see it in his eyes." Davos hesitated. "He's brought peace to the streets. Food, support. The Reach stands behind him now more than ever. That helps you." "No," Stannis snapped. "It helps him." He turned, jaw clenched. "He doesn't serve me. He waits for me to fall." Davos stepped forward. "Then don't fall. Rule. Prove you're the king Westeros needs, not with fire and fear, but with justice." Stannis stared long at him. For a moment something softened in his eyes. "I try," he said quietly, "but every day I rule alone while he dances in the light." Down below in the heart of the Red Keep, Renly met with Loras in the dark. They hadn't spoken alone since before the battle. Now the distance between them was like a chasm. "You've changed," Loras said. "So have you," Renly answered, voice calm. "You used to talk about flowers and tourneys. Now you speak like a man with knives behind his back." Renly didn't deny it. "I've learned what kingship really is. Not pageantry, not love. It's patience, pressure, knowing when to smile and when to strike." Loras's face twisted with pain. "You're becoming what you swore you never would." "I'm becoming what I have to," Renly replied. Then he leaned closer. "Stannis is cracking. The city knows it. The lords know it. Olenna knows it." Loras said nothing. "I need you," Renly said, quieter now. "When it happens, when it must happen, I need your sword beside me." Loras stared long and hard, and then he nodded once. Not in joy, not in love. In duty, in the sept of Baelor, Melisandre lit candles before the altar of Ralla, eyes closed, breath soft as flame. She saw shadows in her mind, one with a crown of green, one of red. She saw the Iron Throne splitting like wood. She saw fire swallowing the city whole. And she smiled. "The time comes," she whispered. The coup was silent. It happened in the stillness between nights. Renly moved quickly, cleanly. Key captains of the City Watch were bribed. Gold cloaks turned their cloaks. The Lord Treasurer and the Master of Ships were both removed under shadowy accusations. Even the Grand Maester found himself retired after a mysterious fall down. The tower stairs, when it finally came, it wasn't war. It was a rearrangement. Stannis awoke one morning to find himself surrounded by guards who didn't meet his eyes. He stormed into the council chamber. Renly was already there, seated. At the table's head, sipping wine like nothing had changed. Stannis froze. "What is this?" he growled. "A new order, Renly said softly. "One with peace and prosperity. One the realm will accept. One without fire and blood in every corner." Stannis's face burned red. "Treason." "No," Renly said, standing. "Survival." Davos stood at the door, torn, silent. Melisandre was nowhere to be seen. For a moment the two brothers locked eyes. So much unsaid, so much regret. "I loved you once," Stannis whispered, "even if I never showed it." Renly's voice was steady. "I still do, that's why I'm doing this." Then he nodded to the guards, and Stannis Baratheon, rightful king of Westeros, was taken from the Red Keep, not by sword, but by silence. By nightfall, the bells rang again. Renly Baratheon had claimed the Iron Throne, not by right, not by prophecy, but by cunning. And, this time, he smiled with no guilt, because this time the crown fit. The Iron Throne was colder than he expected. Renly Baratheon sat alone in the throne room, long after the council had dispersed and the lords had given their oaths. The torches flickered along the stone walls, casting long, jagged shadows. His crown, smaller than Robert's, lighter than Stannis's, rested on his brow. He'd had it forged anew, gold and green, shaped with thorns and antlers. No red, no fire, just ambition dressed in silk. He thought it would feel different, final maybe. But power never ends. It just shifts. Behind him, Loras approached slowly, his armor now trimmed with green instead of gold. He stopped a few paces from the throne, hesitant. "You haven't said a word since the coronation," Loras murmured. Renly stared ahead. "What is there to say?" "I won." Loras stepped closer. "You don't look like a man who won." Renly's fingers tightened on the armrest. "I've taken the city. The people love me, the lords smile. But I've made 100 quiet enemies and banished the only man I ever feared." "Stannis won't stay silent," Loras said. "Not forever." "I know." Renly's voice dropped. "And when he comes back, it'll be with fire and fury." Far across the sea, on a small island off the Stepstones, Stannis sat at a rough-hewn table lit by torchlight. His beard had grown, and his eyes were darker now, deeper, hollowed out by betrayal. But they still burned with purpose. Melisandre stood behind him, unfazed by exile. "He sits on your throne," she said, voice honeyed with heat. "But he is not the chosen one." Stannis didn't answer. "He betrayed you, lied to you, drove you out with the very gold you gave him." Still he said nothing. Then Melisandre leaned forward, her voice turning sharp. "But you are not broken, you are reborn." Stannis finally looked up, eyes hard. "Then show me the path back." She smiled, eyes glowing like coals. "We'll need blood. King's blood." In the north, Robb Stark ruled from Riverrun, his banners fluttering in cold wind. The word of Renly's rise reached him in fragments. He sent no ravens, offered no allegiance. But he watched and waited. Tywin Lannister, too, read the news with stony silence. His eyes lingered on the name Renly for a long time before he crumpled the parchment and tossed it into the fire. "Fools rise fast," he muttered, "and fall. Just as hard." He turned to his generals. "Let him enjoy his moment. It won't last." Back in King's Landing, Renly ruled with charm, with ease, at least on the surface. Taxes were lowered, food flowed, festivities returned. The people adored him. But cracks spread beneath the gold. The faith, still shaken by Stannis' desecration, grew restless under Renly's irreverence. Some lords from the Vale and Riverlands refused to swear fealty outright. Rumours whispered that Gendry, a bastard of Robert Baratheon, had vanished from the city. And every night Renly dreamt of fire, not metaphor, not prophecy, literal fire, devouring the Red Keep. Melisandre's voice calling his name through smoke. Stannis watching him burn without blinking. One night, Renly stood on the balcony above. The city, Loras beside him. "Tell me the truth," he said quietly. "Did I become the thing I hated?" Loras looked at him a long time. "You became what you had to be." Renly gave a sad laugh. "That's not the same, is it?" "No," Loras said. "It's not." A raven called in the distance, a dark shape cutting across the moon. Below them, the city slept. Above them, war brewed again. Quiet, waiting, inevitable. And so the story ends, as they all do in Westeros, with a crown gained in silence, a throne bought in betrayal, and a kingdom waiting to see how long a false king can wear it.